the Korean Mafia boss, chose her and left me in the rain for 3 years. The night I finally stopped crying, he came and stood in it with me. The night I finally stopped crying, it rained. Not the light kind. Not the kind that comes and goes. The kind that starts before you realize it's serious and then just stays. Heavy and indifferent and cold. I was standing outside the restaurant at midnight. Shift done, coat in my hands, not over my shoulders. I had stopped walking about 30 seconds in, and I just stood there, let it fall. And I remember thinking, I am not going to cry tonight. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had made a decision. A quiet, private, bone-deep decision that there was nothing left to cry about. That whatever had broken 3 years ago had broken as far as it was going to break. And I was done standing at the edge of it, looking down. So I stood in the rain, and I let it fall, and I did not cry. And that is when I heard his footsteps behind me. Seo Min-joon, still in a suit at midnight. No umbrella, just standing there. He didn't say anything, didn't reach for me, didn't offer his jacket or ask me to come inside. He just stood beside me, in the rain, getting wet the same as me. And after everything, 3 years of everything, that was the moment that undid me in a way nothing else had. But it didn't begin there. It began 6 years before, when I was 23 years old, and the most powerful man I had ever been close to was the chef at Obsidian Grill. And my whole life was a double shift and a studio apartment, and the specific exhaustion of someone who is working towards something they haven't named yet. My name is Zara Malone, and this is the full story. I was a waitress at Hanok, a restaurant that existed in 2 registers. The ground floor was public. Beautiful, modern, the kind of place you bring someone you want to impress. The private floor, the one with no listed number, where the reservation system exists by personal invitation only, was something else. I worked both floors. The ground floor because I needed the hours. The private floor because someone had noticed that I was very good at being in a room without disrupting it, that I could hear everything and affect nothing. In the world Seo Min-joon operated in, that skill was worth more than most people understood. I had seen him 40 or 50 times before he ever spoke to me directly. A man like that. Tall, unhurried, the kind of quiet authority that doesn't announce itself. You notice without meaning to. What you notice first is the room, how it changes when he walks in. Not loudly, he was never loud, but the air shifted. Conversations lowered, staff moved slightly faster. Even the regulars, men who had been coming to Hanok's private floor for years, straightened when his silhouette appeared at the entrance. 2 men who always preceded him stood at the door and corridor. His driver waited in the car park all night, every night, engine off, never leaving. That kind of presence doesn't need to announce itself. It just displaces everything around it. I was professional, head down, plates moving, that was the job. The night he spoke to me, I had just delivered a wrong order to his table. Not my mistake, the kitchen's, but mine to manage. I set the correct dish down and removed the wrong one and gave the standard apology, quiet and efficient. He stopped me before I could turn away. "You've worked this floor for 4 months, he said, not accusingly, observationally. And tonight is the first time I've seen you make a mistake." "It was the kitchen's mistake," I said. I just carried it. Something shifted in his expression, very slightly. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working, I know. Sit down anyway." I sat down for 12 minutes while his table discussed business, and he said nothing else to me. Then he stood up to leave and stopped beside me. "What's your name, Zara Malone?" He nodded once, walked out. 2 days later, I received a formal note through Hanok's management. He was requesting me as his dedicated server for the private floor. Better hours, better compensation, confidentiality requirements that made very clear what kind of world I was agreeing to enter. I signed it. I didn't know then that I was also signing something that had no legal document. The specific contract that forms between 2 people when one of them starts to matter to the other. Slowly and without announcement. What Seo Min-joon and I had was never loud. It was built in the margins. The end of his last meeting and the beginning of the kitchen cleanup. The evenings when everyone else had gone and he sat at the private floor table with a glass of something he barely touched, and I sat nearby doing inventory that didn't need doing. He talked, not about the Empire, not directly, but about the shape of things, about decisions that were made and the cost of them, about his father, rarely, and his mother, more carefully. He talked and I listened, which was apparently something he did not have in surplus. I asked him once, "Why do you tell me things you don't tell your council?" He considered it for a moment. "Because you have no stake in them," he said. "You won't use what I say to position yourself. You'll just hold it." "That's what waitresses are for," I said. He looked at me. "No," he said. "That's what you're for." I felt that land somewhere I wasn't ready for it. It was 8 months before anything changed between us. 8 months before the line between professional and personal blurred in a way neither of us pretended it hadn't. And when it happened simply. A night that ran long, a silence that shifted, and his hand covering mine on the table for a moment that lasted exactly long enough to be undeniable. We didn't perform it for anyone. No announcement, no introduction to his world. Just something that existed between us, real and unspoken, and I thought, growing towards something. I was wrong about what it was growing toward, but I didn't know that yet. This is the part of the story I only understood later. At the time, I was still thinking we were building something together. What I didn't see was the room where he was being offered a different kind of building. 3 months before anything became visible, there was a gathering at the CO family estate that I was not invited to, because I was not the kind of person who got invited to gatherings at the CO family estate. Madame Seo Hyunja had built her son's empire the way you build a wall, deliberately, stone by stone, every piece chosen for its load-bearing function. She did not leave gaps for sentiment. She was not cruel. She simply understood power as architecture, and architecture does not accommodate things that cannot carry weight in the structure. A waitress from a public restaurant floor, however talented, however quietly essential to her son's private hours, was not a load-bearing element. She was, in the language Madame Seo used for things she had already decided, a distraction. She had been quietly compiling a different kind of future for her son, one that came with a name, a bloodline, a social architecture that would reinforce everything she had spent 30 years building. Marriage in her world was not romantic, it was political infrastructure. Her name was Yeon Harin. Yeon Harin was beautiful in the way that rooms like the CO estate expected beauty to look, poised, precise, the product of generations of curated presentation. She had known Seo Min-jun since they were teenagers. She had been patient in the way that women who have been told they will eventually get what they want learn to be patient. At that gathering, while I was taking a double shift at Hanok, because Mondays were always short-staffed, Min-jun sat across from Harin at his mother's dining table and said nothing to contradict the idea that this was a direction he was open to. His mother smiled, Harin smiled, and somewhere across the city I was folding napkins and thinking about a conversation we'd had the night before and what it meant. I thought it meant one thing. It meant something entirely different. He told me on a Thursday, not in a long conversation, not with the kind of careful attention he had always given difficult things. He came to Hanok in the early evening before service, and he sat at the private floor table and he told me that his family had an expectation he had agreed to honor. He told me Yeon Harin's name. He told me she would be accompanying him to the Seulin Alliance Gala the following month. He told me he valued what we had, that it had been real, had been. I sat across from him and kept my hands flat on the table. I remember that specifically. Keeping my hands flat, because if I lifted them, I didn't know where they would go. "Is this a conversation?" I said. "Or is it an announcement?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I did not expect. "You were never supposed to become part of the decision," he said it quietly, without cruelty, like it was a fact about gravity, something that existed outside his wanting it to. I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means this was always going to happen," he said. "The alliance, my family's expectation. It was decided before I met you, and I let you believe something different. That was my failure." "A failure," I repeated. It's an explanation, he said. An explanation assumes there's something to explain, I said. This sounds like a decision that's already been made. He didn't disagree. I stood up. I straightened my apron. I looked at him one time, directly, long enough to make sure he saw my face and understood what was in it, and then I walked out of the private floor. That was the last conversation we had for 3 years. It was raining when I stepped outside, hard and cold, and I stood there in it because I couldn't make myself go anywhere yet. Couldn't go home, couldn't go back inside, couldn't do anything but stand in the rain while 3 years of what I thought we were building dissolved around me, like they had never existed. I stood there until I couldn't feel the cold anymore. Then I went home, and I cried for a very long time. The hardest thing about grief that nobody announces is that it doesn't follow a schedule. It wasn't every day. Some weeks I was fine, working, functioning, making plans that had nothing to do with him. And then I would hear something that reminded me. And the rain would start again, inside, without warning. A particular kind of quiet. A voice in a corridor with the same register. The private floor at Hanok, which I transferred off of within the week and never returned to. I moved to the ground floor. Different hours, different clientele, different atmosphere, safe in its anonymity. I rearranged the geography of my life. New bus route, new coffee shop, new side of the city for groceries on Sundays. I did this methodically, not dramatically. The way you child-proof a house. Removing sharp things from reach not because you're afraid of them, but because you would prefer not to bleed unnecessarily. It helped, some. The problem with caring about someone is not the places you go together. It's the places you go alone and think of them anyway. The window seat on the bus. The smell of a particular cold night. The specific quiet of a restaurant floor at the end of service when the last table has paid and you're folding napkins in the dark. Those things you can't reroute around. I heard things, of course. In a city where his name moved through certain rooms, the way weather moves through a landscape, information found its way to me, whether I looked for it or not. The first photograph appeared 3 weeks after he told me. Harin in blue, a gown that moved like water, his hand at the small of her back at the Celine Alliance gala. Light, guiding exactly, as it had once guided me through the private floor corridor after midnight when the building was empty, and we had both pretended we were still just employer and staff. That specific placement, that was the part I couldn't stop looking at. I put my phone down and finished my shift. The formal announcement came 6 months later, in the language his world uses for these things. The Seo and Yeon families are pleased to confirm an alliance. I read it on a Tuesday morning before my shift, put the phone face down, went to work. I was very good at going to work. 3 months after that, I was assigned a large table near the window. A private booking, 8 guests. I had checked the reservation. I hadn't noticed the name. I was halfway across the floor with the first round of drinks when I looked up and saw Seo Min-jun seated at the far end. He hadn't come to the private floor, he had come to mine. I don't know whether he had known I was working that night, or whether it was genuinely coincidence. What I know is that he looked up at the same moment I looked up, and for 1 second, one full undisguised second, he went completely still. I turned around and walked back to the service station. I told my colleague the table was hers. I went to the back and stood at the sink and counted slowly to 30. Then I went back to work. That was year 1. There were 2 more to go. Year 2 was quieter than year 1. Not better, quieter. The volume of it lowered and the weight shifted, the way a heavy bag settles differently once you've been carrying it long enough. By year 3, I had stopped thinking about him every morning. He had moved somewhere deeper, to the place where things live when you have processed them as far as they will go, but not all the way through. I would go days without, then have a week where everything pointed back. I didn't want to close it. Closing it would mean deciding it hadn't been worth what it cost. And it had been worth it. That understanding didn't stop the rain. But it changed what the rain meant. Miss Dolores had owned Hanok's ground floor operations since before the building had a second story. She was 63 years old, had never once in her life been uncertain about what she thought, and had been watching over me from the moment I walked through the door, looking like someone who was trying very hard not to show what had just happened to them. She saw it immediately. She said nothing about it for 3 weeks. Let me work. Let me find my footing. Then one afternoon, when the floor was quiet, she appeared beside my section with 2 cups of coffee and the specific expression of a woman who has decided it's time. "Sit," she said. "On shift, the floor is empty. Sit." I sat. She set the coffee down and looked at me with the kind of directness that doesn't leave room for performance. "You're carrying something," she said. "I don't need to know what it is, but I need you to understand something." She tapped the table once. "This floor will not fix it. Ours will not fix it. Being the best waitress in this building will not fix it. You understand me?" "I understand," I said. "Good," she said. "Now drink your coffee." She didn't press, didn't ask for the story. What she did was something harder to explain. She made herself a constant, present, warm, with enough sharpness to keep me from sinking too far into any given week. When the announcement about Ha Rin came out, she appeared beside my section within 20 minutes of my arriving for my shift. I hadn't said a word. She just knew. She placed her hand on my shoulder once, briefly. Then she said, "Men make the choices that are easiest to explain to their families. That has nothing to do with what they actually feel, and it has nothing to do with your worth." I looked at her. "Did that help?" she asked. "Not really," I said honestly. "Good," she said. "Grief that goes too easily isn't finished. When it stops hurting, that's when you're actually getting somewhere." She was right. I hated that she was right. There are things I found out only later. Things that had been happening in rooms I didn't have access to during those 3 years, while I was keeping my hands flat on tables and my feelings out of my face. The alliance between Seo and Yeon had not been what it looked like from the outside. Min-jun had honored the expectation his mother set, because he was, at his core, a man who carried his family's weight as if it were his own spine. Without it, he couldn't stand. The announcement was real. The partnership was real. What wasn't real was the rest of it. What the photographs showed and what the rooms held were different things. Harin had known this. She was not calculating or cruel. She was simply someone who had accepted a particular arrangement and was trying to build within it. She was not the villain of this story. She was doing exactly what she had been prepared to do. But Min-jun had been somewhere else in his mind for 3 years. In the margins of meetings, in the hours of early mornings, in the specific kind of absent quality that people who know him well had started to notice. His driver, a quiet man named Woo Jin, who had been with him for a decade, told me much later. He used to come to Hanok on Thursday nights and sit in the car for 20 minutes before driving away. For almost 2 years, I had never seen him. He had never come inside. I didn't know what to do with that information when I received it. So I held it quietly, the way I always held things that were too heavy to put down. 3 years is a long time to grieve something that was never fully yours. Or maybe it was fully mine. That's the part I had to make peace with. That it was real, that it mattered, that the fact that he made a different choice did not retroactively erase the 8 months of quiet conversations or the specific way he said my name when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. It was real. He chose to walk away from it anyway. Both things were true. The night I stopped crying, I had not cried in 11 days. That was the longest stretch in 3 years. I noticed it, the way you notice when a background sound finally goes quiet. The absence. My shift ended at midnight. I stood in the car park collecting myself before the walk to the bus stop, and I thought, I am not going to cry tonight. And something about the thought felt different than it had the hundreds of previous times I had said it. It felt finished, like arriving somewhere instead of attempting to. It started raining before I reached the door. I stopped walking, stood still, let it fall on me. I was not crying, I was not in pain. I was just standing in the rain being rained on, and it felt, strangely, like honesty. Like the sky and I had agreed on something. I don't know how long I stood there. Then I heard footsteps. And I knew, before I turned around, without logic or reason, the way you know things that have been living in your body for 3 years, I knew who it was. He was alone. No driver, no security, no suit jacket. The sleeves of his shirt were already wet. His hair was flat with rain. He stopped when he saw that I had heard him, about 4 feet away. He didn't say, "I was wrong." He didn't say, "I've been driving to your street for 2 years without coming inside." He didn't have any of the sentences I had imagined this conversation starting with, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Then he said, "Wu Jin told me you transferred floors 3 years ago." "Yes," I said. "I went to the private floor last week," he said. "They told me you'd never come back to it." "No," I said. Another pause. The rain kept falling. Neither of us moved. "You're not carrying an umbrella," he said. "I know. You're soaked." "So are you," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched something move across his face. Not the controlled authority I had always known him to carry, but something underneath it. Something that had apparently been there for a while, waiting for him to stop driving past it. And then, instead of reaching for me, or offering his jacket, or telling me to go inside, or beginning any of the speeches I had imagined him giving, in the 100 times I had rehearsed this conversation in the dark, he took one step forward and stood beside me, in the rain, getting wet, staying, not pulling me out of it, not solving it, not explaining himself, just occupying the same rain that I was standing in, as if what I needed was not to be rescued from it, but to have someone finally willing to stand in it with me. I didn't speak for a long time. Then I said, "That's not going to be enough." "I know," he said. "You can't just stand in the rain and have it fixed." "I know that too." "Then why are you here?" He turned to look at me. His face was wet. His expression was something I didn't have a clean name for. Not regret exactly, not apology. Something older than both. The specific face of a man who has understood something too late, and is not asking to be forgiven for it, only asking to be allowed to remain in its presence. "Because I've been driving to this street for almost 2 years, he said, "and tonight I stopped driving and started walking. That's the only answer I have right now." I looked at him. I thought about Mr. Doris saying, "When it stops hurting, that's when you're actually getting somewhere." I thought about 3 years of rain. I thought about the specific way a person stands beside you without asking for anything. Just stands there, and how that can be more than any speech. "You're going to have to give me something better than rain," I said. "I know," he said. "Not tonight, but I know." We stood there together for a long time, neither of us moving inside. Neither of us pretending the rain wasn't falling, and that, not a ballroom, not a claiming, not a crowd of witnesses, that was the moment. Not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time in 3 years, the rain was no longer something I was standing in alone. I am not going to tell you we fixed everything that night. We didn't. What I will tell you is that the next morning he came to Hanok during the quiet hour before service. He brought no prepared words and no speeches. He did not go to the private floor. He sat at a ground floor table, table 4, the public section, the one visible from the street, where anyone walking past could see exactly who was sitting inside and who they were waiting for, where the reservation system was open to anyone, and the menu had prices printed on it, and there was nothing exclusive or hidden or protected about the choice of being there. In his world, that was not a small thing. That was the first fully public choice he had ever made about me. Miss Dolores saw him before I did. She appeared beside me in the kitchen doorway, looked at me once and said, "Man in a very good suit, table 4. He walked past the private floor stairs and kept going. Looks like someone who has finally decided something. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him coffee was $4, she said. "Same as everyone else." She gave me one look, the specific look of a woman who has been right about something for a very long time, and went back to work. I walked out to table 4. He looked up. He was in the window. Anyone walking past could see him. He hadn't tried to hide it, hadn't asked for a quieter table. He was just there in the daylight, in the public floor, visible, and we began. Not from where we had been, not from the private floor and the 8 months of margins and the unspoken things, but from the beginning, properly, with nothing hidden and nothing agreed in advance, and the whole street able to see us through the glass, if they cared to look. It was not fast, it was not clean, but it was the first thing between us that had ever been fully visible. And that, after 3 years of rain, was everything. It was not fast, it was not clean. There was no public ballroom where the crowd turned and witnessed his choice. There was just us in the daylight taking it one morning at a time. Here is what I know now that I did not know when I was standing in that car park on a Tuesday morning with my phone face down and 3 years of rain ahead of me. Grief is not weakness. Staying in a feeling until it has finished teaching you is not the same as being stuck in it. Some things need to be felt to their full depth before they release you. I cried for 3 years because the thing I lost was real enough to deserve 3 years. The rain was not punishment. It was the shape of love that wasn't being met. And the night I finally stopped, the night I stood in the actual rain and felt for the first time like I had arrived somewhere, that was not because I gave up. That was because I had finally finished letting it break what it needed to break. And what remained was just me, intact, wet, standing. He came and stood in it with me. Not as a rescue, not as a claiming. As a man finally willing to get wet, that is different. And it mattered in a different way. A quieter, more permanent way than any ballroom could have given us. I am still learning the difference between a man who pulls you out of the rain and a man who stands in it beside you. One of them needs you to be fixed to love you. The other loves you in the rain. My name is Zara Malone. He chose someone else and left me in the rain. I stood in it for 3 years. The night I finally stopped crying, he came. He didn't bring an umbrella. He just stood beside me. And for the first time, I wasn't standing in it alone.